Hi, everybody. I'm Bryce Huffman. I'm a reporter and producer here at BridgeDetroit. This morning, I'm joined with Victoria Burton-Harris, who is running for Wayne County Prosecutor, and her campaign manager, Chris Marchione. How's it going?
Good morning.
Good morning to both of you. All right. So first question's an easy one. Just let me know what made you want to run for county prosecutor? What got you thinking about joining this race?
Well, I did not raise my hand and volunteer for this initially. I was asked by several people in the community, from community organizers, leaders of organizations, defense attorneys, even some elected officials. They all said, Victoria, you really should do this. We think you're the only person who can, run a viable campaign against Prosecutor Worthy, and it is certainly time for a change. And no one has run against her in 16 years in the primary. And I said no to each and every one of them. I had no interest, quite frankly, in being what I knew to be the traditional prosecutor, which is being tough on crime and locking people up. I had no interest in continuing to feed, Black and brown folks through the system, which is a very parasitic system, and it feasts on the bodies of not just folks of color, it feasts on our children, it feasts on folks who have mental health issues, folks battling with substance addiction, and we have never dealt with the issue of jails and prisons not creating safe communities. And so I was not interested in perpetuating that. And it was not until a friend of mine who it works in the criminal justice reform space, she sat me down and she said, you are looking at this too narrowly. Why don't you look at progressive prosecutors who are currently in office, like Larry Krasner in Philadelphia, Rachel Rollins in Boston, Kim Fox, Kim Gardner, and why don't you open your eyes and expand your thinking to see that the time is now for someone like you as a defense attorney that has a background in understanding that you have to get to the root cause of an issue in order to effectively solve it. And that if you become our next Wayne County prosecutor, you can use your power for good. You can be smart on crime, not this traditional age-old idea of tough on crime. And so I did that. I reached out to a lot of progressive prosecutors and candidates at the time who were running for office. I read a lot. I spoke to a lot of prosecutors currently in the Wayne County Prosecutor's Office to ask if this was a change that they would welcome. And I heard a resounding yes. And so once I did that research, I began to feel that as a criminal defense attorney, this is what I've been wanting to do, what I've worked to do my entire career, is to do the right thing and use my power for good, be a social engineer for justice, like Charles Hamilton Houston said, instead of a parasite on my community.
All right. And Chris, as a campaign manager, what got you onto the team, and how do you feel about this race so far?
I was recruited by Real Justice out of Philadelphia, and I wasn't planning on running a race in Wayne County, and then they got me on the phone with Victoria, and I was sold. And as far as how's the race going, I mean, it's from the time I've started to now, the progress that we've made has just been unbelievable. I'm not saying there's a direct correlation between the two, but I mean, Victoria has been as dedicated as a candidate as you could ever hope to work for from somebody in my position.
All right. So Victoria, you're running against someone who's been the incumbent for a long time here in Wayne County. For most of my politically conscious life, anyway. What are your thoughts on Prosecutor Worthy?
I don't have any thoughts on her personally. I've only, met her once, I believe, and she was a pleasant human being. But I take issues with the policies in that office and the practices that I see on the ground in the courtroom, and certainly the record of Prosecutor Worthy. It's important when you talk about a person's record that you look at the entire record and not just the good things that they want to present and use to push the bad things back. I've studied this case of Devontae Sanford, a 14-year-old child that Prosecutor Worthy wrongfully imprisoned and kept in prison for almost a decade after she knew he was innocent and after she knew she had the right person in prison for quadruple murder. And when I Google my opponent, that's one of the third or the fourth links that shows up on her Google page, is that she has never atoned for her sins with that case. She's never apologized. We have other cases, many of them like it, which have led Wayne County to being the county in Michigan with more wrongful convictions than all other counties combined. And that causes one to ask, how does that happen? There's a conviction integrity unit that's staffed with one full-time attorney. How is it that we don't have a bigger unit to focus on bringing more of those folks home? And how is it that we became the county leading the way in wrongful convictions? And that takes you back to, again, as a defense attorney, I'm trained to look beneath the surface and go right to the root of the problem. The root of that problem is that we have a Wayne County Prosecutor's Office that has a warrant division that rubber stamps warrant requests from police officers. And we charge first and we investigate later, if at all. And we know that to be true because my opponent just said a little over 2 weeks ago on Fox 2, Let It Rip on a Sunday morning, that a lot of her prosecutors do not even look at the body cam footage and all of the evidence before they go to trial. So that means that they haven't done their investigation and looked at it before they signed a warrant and brought a person into the system. And we know most cases don't make it to trial. So what happens to folks that plead guilty because they don't think they have any other option, but lo and behold, they are actually innocent, but the Wayne County Prosecutor's Office does not review all of the evidence before they bring an innocent person into the system.
You brought up bringing innocent people into the system, and I wanted to talk to you about the Robert Williams case real quickly. Williams was your client, or is your client, I should say. He was wrongfully arrested, and police used facial recognition data to get him as a suspect. What can you tell us about that case, and what do you think as a prosecutor, county prosecutor, you would have done differently?
Oh, well, I can tell you that, as the defense attorney for Mr. Williams, I took the case because once I heard the facts, I knew that this was the reason why so many folks in Detroit have been jumping up and down about banning that technology. It's faulty, it's unreliable, and it's very racist. It was tested on white men, and it confused Michelle Obama for Oprah. And so we know that it was not designed to pick up on the facial features of Black and brown folks, and it should not be used in the Blackest city in America. But yet it was, and it continues to be. And when my client was arrested at his home in front of his 2-year-old and 5-year-old daughters and his wife and neighbors and mother-in-law, that was the beginning of the trauma for him. He spent 30 hours at the Detroit Detention Center. And it was not until he was interrogated by 2 detectives that he learned what the crime was that he had been charged for or charged with, and why he had been arrested. But he also learned that facial recognition technology picked him up out of a database of old driver's licenses, and they had the wrong guy. The detectives held up a photo and asked him, was that him? And he said, no. They held up a second photo, enlarged version of the first. And they said, so this isn't you either? And he took the photo and held it up to his face. And he says, I hope you don't think all Black people look alike. And that's when the detectives notified him that the computer had gotten it wrong. But that calls into question, how did he, after the 2 detectives deduced that the computer had gotten it wrong, how did he end up being prosecuted still after that? And that goes back to the gatekeeper of the system, the Wayne County Prosecutor, and what happens in the warrant division. There is not a policy that dictates how prosecutors determine if a warrant request should be authorized. When I speak to my colleagues that work in that office and who have worked in that office, they all have told me the same thing. Victoria, there is no criteria. We sign warrants depending on who's there and their mood that day. And so that's how you get so many rubber stamped warrants when we don't require an investigation and we just simply sign and authorize people to be brought into a system, and we waste taxpayer dollars and we expend our already tight budget and our limited resources. And then we just later say, oh, well, we have to move to dismiss it because we have insufficient evidence. Well, if a prosecutor knows that they have insufficient evidence at the onset when they authorize a charge, they shouldn't be authorizing it. And that is one of the biggest problems in the Wayne County Prosecutor's Office. We routinely hear from the current prosecutor that they don't do that, but we have to go beyond words. We have to look at their actions. And we continue to see cases come out of that office that are dismissed because there was insufficient evidence. So that calls into question this theory that they don't rubber stamp warrants, because they do. They certainly do.
So, Chris, Victoria is trying to approach the county prosecutor role in a different way than we've seen before. As a campaign manager, how do you handle that messaging, and how do you handle talking to people about that idea when we haven't really seen it in Detroit before?
Well, I think that's what makes the messaging so easy, is that we haven't seen it in Detroit before. And you look at the dysfunction in the prosecutor's office right now, you know, the majority of people that this campaign talks to agree it's time for something new in the prosecutor's office. And with everything going on, I was telling Vic last night, you know, I remember the first day I came on with this campaign, and it was, you know, writing a budget, putting together a campaign plan, and then the murder of George Floyd happened, and that changed everything. You know, it was suddenly these things that I was worried, like, I don't know if I want Vic saying that out loud. You know, were suddenly the things that people want to hear from a prosecutorial candidate. So I think the time is right, and I think that people have, like I said, you know, 1,000 wrongful conviction cases still waiting to be heard. You know, people want something new. A radical approach doesn't scare people anymore.
And Victoria, let's switch gears just a little bit and talk about the Detroit Police Department, specifically how they have been depicted treating protesters. We've seen them putting chokeholds on organizers. We've seen them tear gassing people at protests and marches. As a county prosecutor, or as someone who is a candidate to become county prosecutor, tell me about how that relationship between your office and the department would need to change.
So the first thing that I will have to do is make sure I send the message with my policies that I will hold any and everyone accountable for misconduct. Misconduct does not start with putting a knee on someone's neck or placing them in a chokehold. You get comfortable as an officer doing that, even though in the age of technology, you know, you're probably going to be caught on camera and you just don't care. You get comfortable like that when you get away with doing other smaller acts of misconduct, such as lying in a police report, having warrants authorized that shouldn't be authorized, lying on the witness stand, and nothing happens to you. You get away with not turning on your body-worn camera, and the prosecutor does not hold you accountable, and the city doesn't hold you accountable, and you continue to be able to go back to work and take to the streets and engage in the exact same behavior. And it just exacerbates over time this problem, this lack of accountability. And that's how we get to the murderers of George Floyd and the like. And so what's going to happen in January when I take office is folks are going to have to understand it's a new day. And I'm a new kind of prosecutor. And I don't believe that because I work closely with police officers that I should not be holding all of them accountable, not just the ones that make the news for big cases. Because the fact of the matter is that Wayne County is only 40% Black, yet the Wayne County Jail is over 70% of the folks in the Wayne County Jail are Black. So that calls into question, you know, who are the actors that are responsible for that? And it all goes back to the gatekeeper. How is it that a Black woman in a county that has the Blackest city sitting in it, in America, has allowed herself to bring in that many Black and brown folks into the criminal justice system without any justification for it? And so I am going to push back on police officers. They are going to see a different outcome from my warrant division. They will not have all of their warrants just simply rubber stamped. I will not be authorizing criminal charges until I can review, or my office can review, body cam footage in car, in dash cam footage. I want to do a thorough investigation before our office brings charges, and not the other way around of charge first, investigate later.
All right. I only have a few more questions for you. One of them is about the charges against protesters. As we've seen some protesters get arrested and charged. As a prosecutor hopeful, what are your thoughts on that? What are your thoughts on that process of charging protesters?
Shouldn't be tolerated. I commit to not charging protesters who are engaged in exercising their First Amendment rights, because it is the only time that historically folks who look like you and I have gotten a response. Our ancestors have taught us that we march in the streets and then we march right to the voting booth. And so people who are engaged in protesting, I fully support. I am a member of the National Lawyers Guild, who is a member of the National Conference of Black Lawyers, and we have historically always been on the front lines representing and protecting people who engage in demonstrations, direct actions, and protests. I have led Know Your Rights trainings. I have done just here recently a training with Black Lives Matter Detroit chapter on how to actively or effectively protest and how to be prepared for a subsequent arrest. And I have protested myself. Even as a candidate, I have gone out every single weekend since the death of Brother Floyd, and I have been on the ground with protesters, letting them know that I stand with you. That's really important to me, that folks know that their elected officials stand with them. And certainly if I'm standing with you, I'm not going to turn my back on you and charge you at a later date. So I commit to not doing that. I don't believe that we should even be looking at protesters. The purpose of the protest is police misconduct and police brutality. And so we need to be shifting our focus to when police officers plow their cars, their trucks through a crowd of protesters, when our police officers are choking out our protesters on camera, and there's no response from DPD about that. I would much rather have a robust conversation about how we're going to change our behavior to build some community trust between the Black community and law enforcement, as well as the county prosecutor's office, because there currently is none.
All right. Chris, Victoria is a more progressive prosecutor candidate, as she has said a few times now. What kind of endorsements have you been pulling in so far for this campaign?
Well, I'm glad you asked me, because Victoria sometimes forgets some of the endorsements, and I'm always shocked at the ones that she'll manage to forget.
I'm focused on the work. I don't get hung up on like the hoopla of, oh, someone endorsed me. Like, I love it, I appreciate it, but I'm like, Chris, we got to get to this rally. We got to speak. We got to let them know we're there and we care. And he's like, you got to also talk about these big name endorsements.
No, I mean, most notably, and what sort of really raised our profile nationally was Senator Bernie Sanders. Because of that endorsement, I mean, our fundraising base exploded. We have donors when our campaign finance reports are filed next week. We have donors in all 50 states. Our average contribution is under $20, and we're well into the six-figure territory now. But on top of that, and Victoria, you fill in the ones that I miss here, because it seems like there's been so many groups in the last week that that I'm having a hard time keeping up. In fact, I'm trying to find the list that I actually just sent out yesterday. Give me a second. And people are going to see, you can't edit this part so I don't look completely lost, can you?
I'll help out here.
So we've got, all right, our complete list of endorsements is obviously, as I said, Senator Bernie Sanders, Democratic National Committee Black Caucus Chair Virgie Rollins, John Legend. And John Legend, I made the joke, like not some guy named John Legend, but John Legend. Reverend Horace Sheffield, as well as his daughter, City Council Mayor, President Pro Tem Mary Sheffield. We have Virgil Smith Sr., who's the former Chief Judge of Wayne County. We have Romulus City Councilwoman Virginia Williams, Westland City Councilman Mike McDermott, Rita White, who's the president of the Black Women's Lawyers Association, Pastor Barry Randolph, who's the pastor at Church of the Messiah, Planned Parenthood of Michigan, the Michigan Democratic Party Youth Caucus, the Color of Change PAC, Real Justice PAC, the Working Families Party, AMPAC Michigan, which is the American Muslim Political Action Committee, YAPAC, which is the Yemeni American Political Action Committee, MGAGE, Citizens for Detroit's Future, Michigan Liberation, Michigan United. Vic, is there anything I'm forgetting there? I think it's a pretty comprehensive list.
I think so. You got Michigan United and Detroit Action came in.
Yeah.
Yesterday or Monday, one of the two.
All right. And just one last question for you, Victoria.
Yeah.
People hate when I ask this question because they're campaigning, but in the event that you lose, what sort of conversations do you want to have with Kim Worthy about things that she can try to implement and change for the betterment of the county?
I'm actually very glad you asked me this question because I already have that list of things that I'd like to have that conversation with her about. Because we have, as I've said earlier, really started a movement that is much bigger than any of us. I want to continue this momentum for actual real change, whether I'm in that seat or not. And I know that the top issues folks care about most are ending cash bail, bringing restorative justice and racial equity to Wayne County, and holding all bad apples accountable so that we can move away from this rotten bunch that they're perceived to be on the police department. And so I'd like to talk to her about connecting with a woman named, I can't think of her name right now. Goodness, I'm drawing a blank. Danielle Sered out of Brooklyn, who runs Common Justice, a robust restorative justice program that she wants to bring it here to Wayne County. It's my understanding that Prosecutor Worthy told her no some time ago, but I really want to implore Prosecutor Worthy, if she wins re-election, to allow her to come in, because what Prosecutor Worthy sees as restorative justice in this Talk It Out program in the youth court, it is not true restorative justice programming. I also want to talk to Prosecutor Worthy about modeling her office and her policies after other true progressive prosecutors when it comes to ending cash bail for offenses that are nonviolent and low-level offenses, including some felonies. I also want to educate Prosecutor Worthy on the fact that she can do automatic expungement for marijuana convictions in Wayne County for a mere $15,000 with a company called Code for America if she opens her mind to it and shifts her thinking to understanding that she has contributed to a system that has continually preyed on Black folks and Black men in particular, and that she has a responsibility to help redress the wrongs of the failed war on drugs before she leaves office, and that she can do that for, again, a mere $15,000. So I do want to sit down and speak with her if she has an interest in hearing new, young, fresh, progressive ways that she can be a better prosecutor.
All right, Victoria Burton-Harris, running for Wayne County Prosecutor, for Campaign Manager Chris Marchione. Thank you both for being with me this morning.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.